The ceremonial arena was carved from a single massive crystal that had been shaped by artisans over 1,000 years ago. Representatives from 12 different species filled the observation galleries, drawn by word that a human had accepted the ancient Vellani rite of honor combat. Most had come expecting to watch a quick execution. Do-hyun stood in the center of the arena, holding a weapon he had never seen before today. The blade staff was a traditional Vellani dueling weapon, designed for beings with hollow bones and quick reflexes and decades of training. It felt wrong in his hands. Too light and too long, and balanced for movements his body did not know how to make across from him. Lord Cavith performed warm-up exercises that demonstrated his complete mastery of the weapon. His blade staff moved through the air like it was part of his body, spinning and slashing in patterns that were both beautiful and deadly. "You can still withdraw," Cavith called out, his voice carrying easily across the arena. "Apologize publicly and leave this world, and I will let you live." Do-hyun adjusted his grip on the unfamiliar weapon. "And the princess is mine by law. Nothing you do here will change that." "Then I will not be withdrawing." The ritual master, an ancient Vellani whose feathers had faded to pure white, stepped forward to recite the formal rules. The duel would continue until one combatant yielded or was unable to continue. Killing was permitted but not required. No outside interference would be tolerated. When the ritual master stepped back, Cavith attacked. The Lord moved with speed that Do-hyun could barely track, his blade staff becoming a blur of cutting edges and precise strikes. The first blow opened a gash across Do-hyun's left arm. The second caught him across the chest, slicing through his borrowed combat suit and the skin beneath. The third would have taken his eye if he had not thrown himself backward at the last second. The crowd watched in silence as the human was systematically taken apart. This was not a fight. It was a demonstration of the vast gulf between a trained Vellani warrior and a primitive ape who had dared to step above his station. Yvithara stood in the royal observation box, her hands gripping the railing so tightly that her feathers ached. She wanted to scream, wanted to stop this, wanted to do something other than watch the man who had saved her die for her sake. Queen Mathrivs placed a hand on her daughter's arm. He chose this because of me. He chose this because of who he is. Watch carefully, daughter, and understand what you are seeing." Yvithara forced herself to watch. Cavith continued his assault, opening new wounds with every exchange. Blood ran down Do-hyun's face and arms and chest, pooling on the crystal floor beneath his feet. His movements became slower, clumsier, more desperate. But he did not fall. Cavith landed a strike that should have driven Do-hyun to his knees. But the human merely stumbled and then straightened again. Another blow that should have ended the fight. But Do-hyun absorbed it and kept moving. The crowd began to murmur. Something was wrong with this picture. Something they did not understand. Lord Cavith was clearly the superior fighter, clearly winning by every measurable standard. Yet somehow the fight continued. "Why will you not fall?" Cavith demanded, frustration creeping into his voice. "Because falling means she loses," Do-hyun replied through bloody lips. "You cannot win. You must see that winning is not the only way to succeed." Cavith attacked with renewed fury. But something had shifted in the arena. The spectators were no longer watching a quick execution. They were watching something unprecedented. They were watching a being refuse to accept defeat no matter what damage. His body took minutes past that felt like hours. Do-hyun was covered in wounds that would have killed a Vellani. 3 times over, he could barely lift his blade staff, could barely see through the blood in his eyes, but he was still standing, and Cavith was beginning to tire. The Lord had expected a quick victory, had not paced himself for an extended battle. His movements were becoming less precise, his breathing more labored. He had trained his entire life to defeat skilled opponents through superior technique. He had never learned to fight someone who simply refused to stop. Enough of this, Kavith snarled. And he launched into a killing combination that would end this farce once and for all. His blade staff swept toward Do-hyun's throat with all the force and precision he could muster, and Do-hyun, who had been waiting for this moment through all the pain and blood loss, caught the blade with his bare hand. The edge cut deep, slicing through skin and muscle until it scraped against bone. Do-hyun did not let go. Kavith tried to pull back, but the human's grip was like iron, fueled by something beyond mere physical strength. With his other hand, Do-hyun grabbed the blade staff and twisted the weapon snapped in half before Kavith could react. Do-hyun drove his fist into the Lord's face with every ounce of strength he had left. The blow was not elegant or skilled, it was brutal and ugly, and absolutely effective. Lord Kavith crumpled to the crystal floor and did not get up. The arena was silent. Then, slowly, sounds began to emerge from the crowd. Not cheers exactly, but something like wonder mixed with disbelief. They had just witnessed something that should have been impossible. A human defeating a Vellani master duelist through sheer refusal to accept defeat. Do-hyun swayed on his feet, and for a moment it seemed like he would finally collapse. Then Yuvithara was there. Having somehow made it from the observation box to the arena floor in seconds, she caught him before he could fall, supporting his weight despite being half his size. "You impossible creature," she whispered. "You beautiful, stubborn, impossible creature. Did we win?" Do-hyun managed. "You won. You won everything." Queen Methrivs descended from her observation box and walked across the blood-stained crystal floor until she stood before the human and her daughter. "The Varath Kai is concluded," she announced, in a voice that carried to every corner of the arena. "Lord Kavith has been defeated, and his claims against my daughter are hereby null and void." She paused, studying Do-hyun with an expression that held something that might have been respect. "Furthermore, I declare that the marriage contract between House Kavith and the royal house is dissolved. Any who wish to challenge this decision may take it up with our new champion." The political implications rippled through the crowd as everyone processed what the queen had just implied. Lord Kavith's allies began to distance themselves from the unconscious Lord. His enemies began to smile, and Yuvithara looked at her mother with shock. "Champion." The queen smiled. "Kang Do-hyun, you have demonstrated a quality that we Vellani have forgotten in our centuries of civilization. You have shown us what it means to fight for something greater than yourself. I would be honored if you would accept a position in my household." "I am not Vellani," Do-hyun said. "No, you are not. That is why I want you." She extended her hand in a gesture that everyone present recognized as the formal offer of Varathkin, the highest bond of loyalty that could exist outside of blood family. "Be my blade and my shield. Let your enemies be my enemies, and your honor be my honor. In return, you will have the protection of my house and a home on my people for as long as you wish it." Do-hyun looked at Yuvithara. She was crying, tears streaming down her face without shame. "Say yes," she whispered. "Please say yes." Do-hyun turned back to the queen and took her hand. "I accept." The crowd erupted in sounds that were neither approval nor disapproval, but simple acknowledgement that history had just been made. A human had been accepted into the royal household of the Vellani Imperium. Nothing would ever be quite the same again. 3 weeks later, Do-hyun stood in the royal gardens, watching the twin suns set over the crystal spires of the embassy. His wounds had healed, leaving scars that the Vellani physician said could be removed, but that he chose to keep. They were reminders of what he had survived and what he had won. Yuvithara found him there, as she often did in the evenings. "You still look uncomfortable in formal clothing," she observed. I am uncomfortable in formal clothing. Give me combat gear any day." She laughed and came to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Being bound to a people who once thought you were barely worth noticing." Do-hyun considered the question. "I have spent years alone, belonging to nothing and no one. I thought that was freedom. But maybe it was just emptiness. And now I have a purpose and a place and people who actually seem to want me around. It is strange and new, and I am not entirely sure what to do with it." Yvithara turned to face him. "You could start by letting me thank you properly. You have thanked me many times, not properly." She leaned up and pressed her beak gently against his forehead in the Villani gesture of deep affection. Do-hyun stood very still, uncertain how to respond. "That is how my people show gratitude to someone we truly care about." Yvithara explained. "Oh, that is all you have to say." Oh, Do-hyun smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. "Thank you for explaining. I am still learning. You will have time to learn. You are Varathkin now." "You belong here. I belong here," Do-hyun repeated. And the words felt strange in his mouth, but also right. The human who had defended royalty had found something he never expected. He had found a home among the stars, and the queen who had claimed his loyalty had gained something her empire had never possessed before. A protector who would fight for them, not because. The Villani embassy on Sirius 7 rose from the planet's surface like a frozen flame. All crystal spires and impossible angles that caught the light of the twin suns and scattered it into rainbows. Yvithara had not seen this place since she was a child, but she remembered its beauty and its coldness. Both remained unchanged. The persistent dream landed at a private docking facility reserved for diplomatic vessels, and within minutes the ship was surrounded by guards in the silver and blue armor of the queen's household. They did not lower their weapons when Yvithara stepped off the ramp. They raised them higher when Do-hyun followed. "Princess Yvithara," the lead guard said with formal precision, "your mother will be relieved to know you are safe. The human will need to remain here while we verify his intentions." "The human saved my life 3 times," Yvithara replied in a tone that allowed no argument. "He will accompany me." The guards exchanged uncertain looks, but they did not challenge her directly. Instead, they formed an escort that was half honor guard and half prisoner transport, keeping Do-hyun at the center where he could be watched from all angles. The interior of the embassy was even more impressive than the exterior. Walls of living crystal pulsed with soft light, and the air carried a faint fragrance that Do-hyun's translator chip identified as ceremonial incense worth more than his yearly income. Villani officials stopped and stared as the group passed, their feathers rustling with whispered comments that were not quite quiet enough to hide their contempt. A human in the royal wing. What is the princess thinking? This is an insult to everything we represent. Do-hyun ignored the whispers because he had heard worse during his years among species who considered humanity an evolutionary accident. Yvithara heard them too, and her jaw tightened with anger she could not afford to show. They were brought to a grand audience chamber where Queen Methrovs waited on a throne of woven light. She was older than Do-hyun had expected. Her feathers faded from what had probably been brilliant colors to softer shades of gray and pale blue, but her eyes were sharp and calculating, and they missed nothing as she studied the strange pair before her. "My daughter returns," the queen said, accompanied by a human covered in the scars of recent violence. "Mother," Yvithara began, "I did not give you permission to speak." The words were delivered without anger, but they carried the absolute authority of someone who had ruled for 60 years. Yvithara fell silent. The queen's attention shifted to Do-hyun. "You are Kang Do-hyun, freelance security contractor, former soldier in the human colonial defense forces. No criminal record, but also no notable achievements or connections. Why would such a man risk his life repeatedly for a Vellani princess? Because she needed help. Do-hyun answered simply, "That is not an answer. That is an avoidance. Everyone who helps another being has a reason." "What is yours?" Do-hyun considered how to explain something he had never put into words. "I have seen what happens when strong people ignore those who are weak. I have seen what happens when soldiers follow orders instead of their conscience. I decided a long time ago that I would not be that kind of person. So you expect nothing in return for saving my daughter. I expect to be allowed to leave once I know she is safe." The queen leaned forward on her throne. "You confuse me, human. I understand debts and obligations and political maneuvering. I do not understand selflessness. It makes no strategic sense. Maybe that is why it works." For a long moment, the queen simply stared at him. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. "You are either very foolish or very wise, and I cannot decide which." She waved a hand, and servants appeared with food and drink. "You will stay as my guest while I verify my daughter's story. If everything she has told me is true, we will discuss what comes next." The next several days were uncomfortable for Do-hyun in ways that combat had never been Vellani. Servants refused to enter his quarters, leaving his meals outside the door like offerings to a dangerous animal. Guards watched his every movement with weapons that were never quite pointed at him but never quite pointed away. Either High Minister Loreth, the Queen's chief advisor, made it clear at every opportunity that he considered the human presence a contamination of sacred spaces. "Your species has been traveling among the stars for barely 3 centuries, Loreth told him during one forced conversation. "The Vellani Empire is 12,000 years old. You cannot possibly understand the weight of our traditions or the importance of our protocols." "You are right," Do-hyun agreed. "I do not understand your protocols, but I do understand that your princess was being hunted by trained killers. And none of your 12,000 years of tradition seem to be protecting her." Loreth's feathers flared with anger, but he said nothing more. On the 5th day, everything changed. Lord Cavith arrived at the embassy with a diplomatic entourage and a legal document that demanded Yevithara honored the marriage contract her father had signed. The confrontation happened in the Great Hall, with representatives from a dozen species watching as witnesses. "The contract is clear," Cavith declared, holding the document up for all to see. "Princess Yevithara was promised to me as part of a trade agreement between our houses. She has no legal right to refuse. The contract was signed under duress," Yevithara responded, standing tall despite the trembling Do-hyun could see in her feathers. "My father was dying, and you manipulated him in his weakness. Prove it." The challenge hung in the air because they both knew she could not prove it. Vellani law favored written agreements over spoken testimony, and the document was genuine. Queen Matharovs watched the exchange with an expression that revealed nothing. "My daughter raises valid concerns about the circumstances of this contract. With respect, Your Majesty, concerns are not evidence. The law is clear. The law is also clear that I have the authority to dissolve contracts that threaten the stability of my house. Dissolving this contract would have economic and military consequences that your house cannot afford." Cavith replied smoothly, "My allies control 3 of the major trade routes to your territory. Is one rebellious daughter worth a trade war?" The queen hesitated, and in that moment, Do-hyun saw the trap closing. Cavith had not come alone because he was confident. He had come with leverage. Yevithara saw it too. Her shoulders slumped slightly as the reality of her situation became clear. She could run, but her mother would pay the price. She could fight, but her people would suffer, or she could surrender and become the 3rd wife of a man who had already murdered. Do-hyun stepped forward. Lord Cavith. Every eye in the room turned to him with shock and outrage. Humans did not speak in Vellani legal proceedings. Humans did not address Vellani. Nobility directly. Kavath's expression shifted from surprise to contempt. The princess's pet wishes to speak. How amusing. I am not a pet. I am the person who destroyed 2 of your retrieval teams. The contempt flickered, replaced by something that might have been caution. What is your point? Human. My point is that I put 12 of your best operatives in medical care. I did this while protecting someone else. I am curious what I could do if I was only focused on hurting you. Is that a threat? Do-hyun smiled. And there was nothing friendly in it. It is information. The same kind of information you are giving the queen right now. You are telling her what happens if she refuses you. I am telling you what happens if you take the princess against her will. The great hall was absolutely silent, Kavath's face contorted with fury that he could barely contain. You dare threaten me in front of witnesses. I am not threatening. I am promising. Lord Kavath made a decision that would change everything. I invoke Vareth Kai, he declared. The ancient right of honor combat. This human has insulted me before the assembled witnesses, and I demand satisfaction. The queen's eyes widened. Lord Kavath, the Vareth Kai has not been invoked in centuries. The law still stands. This human has challenged my honor, and I have the right to answer that challenge with blades. He turned to face Do-hyun with a predator's smile. Unless the human wishes to apologize and crawl away like the primitive he is. Do-hyun looked at Yuvithara, saw the fear in her eyes, and made his choice. I accept. The cargo hauler was called the Persistent Dream, and it was exactly the kind of ship that attracted no attention. Captain Nam Byong-ho was a gruff man in his 50s who had spent 30 years moving cargo through space lanes that official records. Sod did not exist. He owed Do-hyun a debt from an incident neither man ever spoke about. And when Do-hyun arrived at his docking bay with a bleeding body and a Vellani princess, he asked no questions. Medical supplies are in the back storage compartment. Byong-ho said as he began the launch sequence, and you might want to strap. And because we are leaving in 30 seconds, whether you are ready or not. The ship shuddered as it disconnected from the station and began moving toward open space. Yuvithara helped Do-hyun to a narrow bunk in the crew quarters, and she watched with horrified fascination as he began treating his own wounds. Does that not hurt? She asked as he pressed a sealing patch against a deep cut on his forearm. It hurts, Do-hyun admitted, but hurting and being hurt are different things. Pain is just information. Information about what? Information about how much damage I need to repair before I can function properly again. Yuvithara had never heard anyone describe pain that way. In Vellani culture, pain was something to be avoided and minimized and never discussed in polite company. The idea that someone could treat agony as mere data to be processed was deeply alien to her over the next 2 days. She watched Do-hyun heal. His body fought off infection with aggressive determination, flooding the damaged areas with white blood cells and other biological defenses that her medical scanner identified as remarkably effective. His bones began knitting themselves back together without any intervention. His torn muscles rebuilt themselves strand by strand. The Lani required deep healing meditation for this kind of recovery. She told him on the 3rd day of their journey, we lower our consciousness and let our bodies focus entirely on repair. It takes weeks. Humans do not have that option, Do-hyun replied, flexing his newly healed arm experimentally. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us constantly, so our bodies learned to heal while we kept moving. That sounds exhausting. It is, but it kept our ancestors alive long enough to have children. And I suppose that is what matters from an evolutionary standpoint. The ship's engineer? A small reptilian being named Thessi from a species called the Rilari. Found the entire situation fascinating, unlike most species. The Rilari had always been curious about humans, rather than afraid of them. Your kind confuses me in the best way, Thessi told Do-hyun while adjusting the ship's atmospheric systems. You are fragile and short-lived compared to most spacefaring species. Yet you have spread across more star systems in 300 years than the Vellani did in 3,000. Stubbornness, Do-hyun offered. No, it is more than that. You do not accept limits the way other species do. When the galaxy tells you something is impossible, you simply try harder. Yuvathara listened to these conversations and found her understanding of humans slowly changing. She had been taught from childhood that humans were primitive and dangerous. Clever apes who had stumbled into technology they did not deserve. Now she was watching a human who had nearly died to protect her, healing from wounds that would have killed a Vellani, and discussing philosophy with a ship engineer as if violence and recovery were just normal parts of his daily routine on the fourth night of the journey. She found Do-hyun sitting alone in the cargo bay, staring out a small viewport at the stars. "May I join you?" she asked. He nodded without looking away from the stars. "I've been thinking about why you helped me," Yuvathara said as she settled onto a cargo crate beside him. "And I cannot find an explanation that makes sense. Does there need to be an explanation? Among my people, every action has a purpose. Every kindness is an investment in future returns. No one does anything without calculating the benefit to themselves." Do-hyun finally looked at her. "That sounds lonely." Yuvathara had never considered it that way. But now that he said it, she recognized the truth. It was lonely to live in a world where every relationship was a transaction. "Why did you serve in the military?" she asked, changing the subject to something she had been curious about. Do-hyun was quiet for a long moment. "Because I believed I could protect people who could not protect themselves. Because I thought I could make a difference." "And did you?" "Sometimes, but not always. And the times I failed stayed with me longer than the times I succeeded." "Is that why you left?" "I left because I started to become someone I did not want to be. War changes you, and I did not like who I was changing into." Yuvathara understood this more than she expected to her flight from Lord Kavith was also about refusing to become something she did not want to be. "We are similar in that way," she said softly. Do-hyun looked at her with surprise, as if he had not expected to find common ground with a Vellani princess. "Maybe we are." The moment was interrupted by Captain Byung-ho's voice over the ship's communication system. "We have a problem. Everyone to the bridge now." They found the captain staring at his sensor display with grim concern. 3 ships had appeared from a nearby asteroid field, moving to intercept the persistent Dream, Lord Kavith's hunters. Yuvathara whispered, and Do-hyun could hear the fear returning to her voice. "They must have tracked us somehow. Can we outrun them?" Do-hyun asked. Byung-ho shook his head. "They are faster than us. We have maybe 20 minutes before they catch up." Do-hyun looked at the sensor display, calculating distances and possibilities. "The escape pod," he said. "If I take it and head in the opposite direction, they might follow me thinking I have the princess. It would buy you enough time to reach the embassy." "No," Yuvathara said immediately. "It is the logical choice. I do not care about logic. I will not let you sacrifice yourself for me. Princess, you are more important than I am. Your mother needs you. Your people need you. And what about what I need?" The question hung in the air between them. Yuvathara stepped forward, and for the first time she touched Do-hyun voluntarily, placing her delicate feathered hand on his arm. "I am tired of watching people destroy themselves to protect me. I am tired of being the reason others suffer. If we cannot all escape, then we will all face whatever comes together." She turned to Captain Byung-ho. "I am Princess Yuvathara of the Vellani Imperium, and I am ordering you as a member of the royal family to outrun those ships." Byung-ho raised an eyebrow. "I am not Vellani." "Your orders mean nothing to me." "Then consider it a very strongly worded request from someone who will make sure you are handsomely rewarded if we survive." The captain looked at Do-hyun, who shrugged. "She is stubborn." "I noticed." Byung-ho turned back to his controls and began entering new commands. There is a radiation belt around the third planet of this system. Most pilots avoid it because the interference plays havoc with navigation systems. But I am not most pilots. Will it work? Yvithora asked. Honestly, I have no idea. But it is better than your friend's plan to get himself killed. The next hour was the most terrifying of Yvithora's life. The persistent dream dove into the radiation belt with Lord Cavith's ships closed behind. Alarms screamed as the ship's systems struggled against the interference. Byung-ho flew with the skill of a man who had spent his entire life dancing on the edge of disaster, and through it all, Yvithora stayed on the bridge, watching Do-yoon watch the sensors, ready to help in any way she could. When they finally emerged on the other side, the pursuing ships were gone, lost in the radiation or forced to turn back. We made it, Thessie said, with obvious relief. We made it. Diane agreed, and he allowed himself a small smile. Yvithora looked at the human who had now saved her life 3 times, and she realized something had fundamentally changed inside her. She no longer saw a primitive ape when she looked at him. She saw a protector who asked for nothing in return, a warrior who fought for strangers, a man who valued her life more than his own for no reason she could understand. She saw someone she trusted completely, and among the Villani, trust was the rarest treasure of all. 3 days passed, and Do-hyun convinced himself that the incident in the maintenance corridor was already fading into memory. His wounds were healing with the stubborn determination that human bodies were known for throughout the galaxy. Most species needed weeks of rest and medical treatment to recover from the kind of damage he had taken. Humans just kept going. And that was one of the things that made other species nervous. Around them, Do-hyun visited his old friend Myra Jang in her repair shop on the lower habitation decks. Mira had served with him in the Colonial Defense Forces before she decided that fixing machines was less traumatic than fighting wars. Her shop was small and cluttered, and smelled of engine grease and burned circuits. And Do-hyun always felt more at home there than anywhere else on the station. You look terrible, Mira said, without looking up from the thruster assembly she was rebuilding. You always say the nicest things. I say true things. And the true thing is that you look like you tried to fight a whole squad by yourself again. Do-hyun did not answer. Which was answer enough. Myra finally looked up, and her expression shifted from annoyance to concern. Do-hyun, what did you do? Something stupid. More specific. Help someone who did not ask for help and probably did not want help from a human. Myra set down her tools and gave him the look that said she was about to lecture him about making better choices before she could speak. They both heard the screaming. It came from somewhere nearby, echoing through the metal corridors of the habitation deck. This was not an unusual sound in this part of the station because the lower decks were home to refugees and outcasts and people who had nowhere else to go. But something about this screaming was different. It was organized and purposeful. Like someone was systematically clearing an area. Do-hyun was moving before he made the conscious decision to move. Do-hyun? No, Myra called after him, but he was already out the door. The refugee housing block was 3 corridors away. And Do-hyun arrived to find chaos. Families were fleeing their small quarters, carrying children and whatever possessions they could grab in seconds. Armed figures in tactical gear were moving through the block with military precision, checking faces and pushing aside anyone who was not their target. At the center of the chaos, surrounded by 12 armed operatives, stood the young Villani female from 3 nights ago. She had her back against the wall and nowhere left to run. Found you, the lead operative said, and his voice held the satisfaction of a hunter who had finally cornered difficult prey. Lord Cavith will be pleased that we can finally end this chase. The female, Yvithora, held her head high despite the fear that Do-hyun could see in every trembling feather. Lord Cavith can rot in the void between stars. You could tell him yourself when we deliver you to him." The operative reached for her. And that was when Do-hyun stepped out of the crowd of fleeing refugees. "I thought we discussed this already," he said. And 12 weapons immediately pointed at him. "The ape from the maintenance corridor," one of the operatives said with recognition and anger. "You cost us 5 good soldiers." They were not that good. The lead operative studied Do-hyun with professional assessment. "There are 12 of us now. Human, and we have been warned about your kind. You cannot win this fight." "Probably not," Do-hyun agreed. And he began walking toward them anyway. The first shots came fast. And Do-hyun dove behind a heavy metal support pillar. He had no weapons except his fists and his willingness to use them. The corridor was wider here than the maintenance tunnel had been, which meant the operatives could spread out and flank him. This was a terrible tactical situation. And Do-hyun knew he would likely die here. He attacked anyway. The operatives were good. And they had clearly studied human combat patterns since their last encounter. They kept their distance and used their superior numbers to box him in, but they had made one critical mistake. They had studied human tactics without understanding human nature. Do-hyun did not try to win the fight in the traditional sense. Instead, he made himself the most dangerous and painful target in the room. He grabbed one operative and used the being as a shield against incoming fire. He took a shot to the leg and used the pain to fuel his rage. Instead of slow him down, he let them hit him again and again, because every hit they landed on him was a moment they were not grabbing the prince's. Blood ran down his face and his arms and his chest. And still he kept fighting. The operatives grew frustrated, and then confused, and then genuinely afraid. They had expected a human to fight like other species, to retreat when injured, to protect himself from harm. Do-hyun did not protect himself. He spent himself like ammunition, trading damage for time and injury for impact. By the time station security finally arrived, responding to the reports of violence in the refugee sector, 7 operatives were down, and the remaining 5 had retreated with their wounded. Do-hyun collapsed against the wall, his vision swimming and his body screaming with pain that he could no longer ignore. Yvithora knelt beside him, her elegant feathers stained with his blood. "Why?" she asked, and her voice cracked with emotion she did not understand. "Why you keep helping me? You do not even know who I am." Do-hyun looked at her through eyes that were already starting to swell shut. "Then tell me," he managed. "Tell me who you are and why train killers keep trying to take you." For a long moment, she was silent. Then she spoke words that changed everything. "I am Princess Yvithora, 3rd daughter of Queen Methros of the Volani Imperium, and I am running from a political marriage to a male named Lord Cavith, whose previous 2 wives both died under circumstances that were called accidents, but that everyone knows were murder." Do-hyun processed this information through a haze of pain and blood loss. "You are royalty." "Yes, and you are hiding in a refugee district on a trade station." "I had nowhere else to go. My father arranged this marriage before he died, and the contract is binding under Volani law. If Lord Cavith finds me, I become his property." Do-hyun thought about the Volani, about how they looked down on humans, about how they considered his entire species to be primitive and unworthy. He thought about walking away and letting this princess solve her own royal problems. Then he thought about the fear in her eyes and the dead wives and the 12 armed operatives who would be back with reinforcements. "There is nowhere on this station where they will not find you," he said. "I know. You need to get to somewhere they cannot follow. Somewhere with people who will protect you. My mother maintains loyalist forces at the Volani embassy on Seer 7. But I have no way to get there. Lord Cavith has people watching every transport hub." Do-hyun pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the way his damaged body protested. I know a ship captain who owes me a favor if we leave tonight. We might make it before they realize you are gone." Yuvathara stared at him with an expression he could not read. "You would do this for me. You would risk your life again for a Vellani who has given you nothing." Do-hyun met her eyes. "I would do this for anyone running from someone who wants to hurt them. The fact that you are Vellani does not matter. The fact that you need help does." For the first time since he had met her, Yuvathara smiled. It was small and fragile and uncertain, but it was real. "Then I accept your help, Kang Do-hyun, and I will find a way to repay this debt. Worry about staying alive first," Do-hyun said. "We can discuss debts later." He led her through the back corridors of the station, bleeding with every step. Heading toward the docking bay, where an old friend waited with a ship that could take them to safety behind them. Lord Kavith's operatives regrouped and reported their failure, and far away, in a palace of crystal and light, a lord who had already killed 2 wives began planning how to retrieve the third. The hunt was not over. It was only beginning. Kang Do-hyun had worked security jobs on Varantis Prime for 3 years now, and he had learned one important rule. Never get involved in other people's problems. The massive trade station floated in neutral space where dozens of alien species came to buy and sell and make deals that their governments could not officially approve of. Do-hyun liked it here because nobody cared that he was human, and nobody asked questions about his past in the Colonial Defense Forces. Tonight he was escorting a cargo shipment of medical supplies from Docking Bay 17 to a warehouse on the mid-levels. It was boring work, but boring work paid the bills and kept him fed. The cargo hover sled hummed quietly as it floated through the dimly lit corridors of the stations. Lower commercial district. Most respectable beings avoided these areas after the main lights dimmed for the night cycle. But Do-hyun had never been particularly respectable. He was passing a maintenance corridor when he heard the sounds a sharp cry of fear, followed by harsh voices speaking in a language his translator chip identified as High Vellani. The Vellani were an elegant species that resembled tall birds, with flowing feathers and sharp beaks. They considered themselves one of the most cultured and advanced civilizations in the known galaxy. They also considered humans to be primitive apes who had somehow stumbled into space travel before they were ready. Do-hyun had dealt with enough Vellani to know they would never help him if the situation was reversed. He should keep walking and deliver his cargo and collect his payment. That was the smart thing to do. Instead, he stopped the hover sled and listened more carefully. "You will come with us now, or we will hurt you badly enough that you cannot run again." The voice was cold and professional, and Do-hyun recognized the tone immediately. These were not common criminals looking for easy prey. These were trained operatives on a specific mission. "Please, I have done nothing wrong. I just want to be left alone." The second voice was female and young and absolutely terrified. Do-hyun closed his eyes and cursed himself for what he was about to do. He secured the hover sled, pulled his shock baton from his belt, and moved quietly toward the maintenance corridor. The scene he found was exactly what he expected. A young Vellani female was pressed against the wall, her brilliant blue and silver feathers trembling with fear. 5 armed figures surrounded her, all wearing the unmarked tactical gear of mercenaries who did not want to be identified. They had not noticed him yet. "Last warning," the lead mercenary said, and he raised a neural disruptor that would cause agonizing pain without leaving visible marks. Do-hyun stepped into the corridor. "I think the lady asked to be left alone." 5 heads turned toward him, and he saw the moment they registered what he was, a human standing alone, armed with nothing but a shock baton against 5 beings with military-grade weapons. The lead mercenary actually laughed. "Walk away, ape. This does not concern you." Do-hyun did not walk away. He walked forward. The first mercenary raised his weapon. But Do-hyun was already moving. The maintenance corridor was narrow, barely wide enough for two beings to stand side by side. This was an advantage for Do-hyun because it meant the mercenaries could not all attack him at once. It also meant there was nowhere to hide. Do-hyun did not try to hide. He closed the distance with a speed that surprised the lead mercenary, ducking under the neural disruptor and driving his shock baton into the soft tissue beneath the being's arm. The mercenary screamed and dropped, and Do-hyun took his weapon. The second mercenary fired, and Do-hyun felt a line of burning pain across his shoulder as the shot grazed him. He ignored the pain because pain was just information. And right now, the only information that mattered was surviving the next few seconds. He used the fallen mercenary as a shield, shoving the twitching body into the path of the third attacker while he fired the stolen disruptor at the fourth. The corridor became chaos. Do-hyun fought with a brutal efficiency that had been drilled into him during years of colonial warfare. He did not fight like the Vellani, with elegant movements and calculated strikes. He fought like a human, which meant he fought dirty and he fought mean, and he absolutely refused to stop, no matter how much damage he took. A blade caught him across the ribs, and he grabbed the arm that held it and broke it at the elbow. A stun blast hit him in the back, and he turned and threw the shock baton so hard it cracked the shooter's face mask. By the time station security alarms began to wail in the distance, all 5 mercenaries were on the ground. Do-hyun stood among them, breathing hard, bleeding from half a dozen wounds that would need medical attention soon. The young Vellani female stared at him with wide eyes that held equal parts terror and disbelief. "What are you?" she whispered. "Just a guy who should have minded his own business," Do-hyun replied. And he winced as the adrenaline began to fade and the pain began to grow. He could hear security forces approaching, their heavy boots echoing through the corridors. In a few minutes, this place would be full of questions he did not want to answer and attention he did not need. He looked at the young female, and he saw something in her eyes that told him she did not want that attention either. "Can you run?" he asked. She nodded quickly. "Then run, and maybe pick better hiding spots next time." He did not wait for her response before he turned and limped back toward his abandoned cargo sled. The medical supplies would need to be delivered, and he would need to explain why he was late and why he was bleeding behind him. He heard the soft rustle of feathers as the Vellani female disappeared into the shadows of the station. Do-hyun did not look back because looking back meant caring, and caring meant getting involved. And getting involved was exactly what he had promised himself he would never do again. He delivered the cargo, collected his payment, and found a back alley medical station where the doctor asked no questions as long as the credits were good. 3 hours later, he was back in his tiny rental quarters, wrapped in bandages and staring at the ceiling. He wondered who the girl was and what she was running from. He wondered why 5 professional mercenaries had been sent to capture a single young female. He wondered if she was safe. Then he told himself it did not matter because she was Vellani, and the Vellani thought humans were barely worth noticing. He had done his good deed, and now it was over, and he would never see her again. That was what he told himself as he fell into an uneasy sleep, far across the station, in a hidden room that cost more credits than Do-hyun earned in a year. Princess Yevithera of the Vellani Imperium accessed the station's security records. It took her considerable skill to find the information she wanted, but eventually she had a name and a face and a location: Kang Do-hyun, human, freelance security contractor. No known affiliations. He had saved her life and asked for nothing in return. He had fought like a creature from the old nightmare stories her nurses used to tell her when she was young. and he had let her go without demanding answers or rewards or anything at all. Yuvathara had been raised in a royal court where every action had a purpose and every kindness came with strings attached. She did not understand someone who helped a stranger. For no reason she did not understand. But she found that she wanted to. She saved the information to her personal files and wondered if she would ever see the human again